Well, the S&P 500 is now down 17.9% or 18% to round up by my math from all-time highs. That all-time high, you will notice, was set January 4th, 2022, just about a month before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The more this goes on, I think that a lot of us, or at least history, I should say, the history books probably will look back on January 2022 as the peak of American and more broadly Western power in not only Europe, but probably the entire world. Because the attitude going into the war in Ukraine was that the U.S. could, frankly, do everything short of directly provoking, directly goading Russia, although you could argue, certainly as I did at the time, that they were indirectly goading Russia. And they believed that if they did that, it would still work out well for them. That no matter what they did, either Russia didn't invade Ukraine and everything stayed normal, the West wins, or Russia invades Ukraine and gets humiliated, and the West sanctions Russia to death. Putin is out within a matter of weeks rather than months. And Joe Biden could pat himself on the back and say, we got rid of Putin. And so would all the rest of the leaders of Western Europe, Boris Johnson, Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Mario Draghi, who could forget Draghi, the unelected central banker, who was handed the reins of power in Italy. Anyway, all these people, they thought, okay, this is a win-win situation for us. And yet, we look back and that was the peak of supposed Western economic prosperity. It's been downhill ever since. The S&P 500 is nearly 1,000 points off the highs. As I said, 18%. We're just about into a bear market. We were, of course, already in a bear market, and if we go back into a bear market, I guess you could say that we were in a bear market the whole time, and that this was just a bear market rally. That would not surprise me, considering that the situation on the ground, in every sense, has materially gotten worse since the beginning of what Zero Hedge termed this most hated rally. And so we only have, it could be a number of days, by the end of this week maybe, or maybe next week I should say, I don't want to get too aggressive. By next week, the entirety of this bear market rally could be wiped out, and we could be ready for the next leg down in the stock market. And the stock market is not something that I've talked about much on this channel in recent months, because frankly there's been so much more that has been frankly far more important than the stock market. But the stock market itself, it is an indicator of some sort. It is a highly manipulated and distorted indicator, but it does still have some relationship to reality, even if it's not what we think. It's not that the stock market, the number that you see every day, reflects the economic prosperity of the United States, or in the case of the S&P, really the global economy. But the direction that those numbers are moving does have significance. It has significance for consumer sentiment. It has significance for how richer people feel about the future, which, I mean, it's not directly tied to consumer sentiment, because when I say consumer sentiment, I mean including people who don't own stocks. If people who don't own stocks, when they turn on the news every day and says, oh, the stock market's doing really well, even though they don't own stocks, they still feel like the stock market is some reflection of the economy, and so they feel better about their economic position. They feel more confident going out on a limb, maybe going into debt to buy a new couch, or a new refrigerator or something like that. And then in the case of richer folks, the appreciation of their assets is what funds their consumption. I've talked about this relentlessly in the past, that it is because the baby boomers have had such a rapid rise in their net worths via asset appreciation that they have been able to live high on the hog for so long. It is boomer consumption that has been the driver of economic trends in this country for multiple decades now. Not just because of the sheer size of their population, the fact that the boomers are the biggest generation, but as I said, because they have been the ones who have benefited the most from this rapid appreciation, artificial appreciation in asset prices, which some say began, some of them draw the line, at the Greenspan putsch. But frankly, I would just go all the way back to the bottom of the market, in 1980, 1981, thereabouts, in the Volcker era. That was where things bottomed. So as far as I'm concerned, if you've been in the market since then, or however far back, the closer you entered the market to the bottom, obviously the richer you are now. And this has afforded boomers the opportunity to own multiple homes, to buy $80,000 cars, or in the case of, maybe some of the better off ones, $120,000 Ford pickup trucks. These very same people, will shell out $750,000 for a crappy house on a postage stamp lot with a supposedly two-car garage that really only holds one car plus their golf cart. And so, in short, the wealth effect, which has led to the boomers partaking in all of this copious consumption, has priced younger generations out of the market for many, many things, such as new cars, such as homes, and anything that is not electronics, basically. Because electronics have had such rapid innovation over the last 30 to 40 years that even though we've had this rapid inflation in consumer prices, prices have been constantly bid up. The innovation in electronics has been so extreme that prices have gone down despite that. So in other words, electronics prices would be even lower, would have gone down even faster, were it not for all of this inflation. Now, this is just one aspect of inflation. This is one cause of inflation. Stamping out the boomers, crushing the boomers, driving them into the poorhouse will not stop the inflation that is caused by federal government deficit spending. Multi-trillion-dollar deficits are still going to cause inflation, but a big driver of inflation, a big inflationary factor, will be mitigated by the Fed collapsing the stock market, which the Fed has made it clear is pretty much their goal at this point. The term I believe they're using is growth recession, which I don't know how that's different from a recession, but they're calling it a growth recession. They want slower growth and a tougher labor market. And does the Fed really have the power to affect that? No, not really, but they can affect the price of stocks, which will then affect those things. So what they're going to do is crush the stock market, which will lead to a reverse wealth effect, meaning that consumption should fall off a cliff. All of those, $110,000 pickup trucks should just sit on the lot. Those Teslas should not be, flying off the shelves as fast as they are right now. Housing prices should necessarily collapse. They're already in the early stages of that now. The housing market is slowed to a crawl, but has not, turned the corner really yet in most markets, I don't think. But if the Fed really is serious and they're going to stick to this plan of pulling the rug out from under Wall Street, then the bear market rally is truly over. It's not coming back. We are going to go down and make new lows, and frankly, there should be no floor if fundamentals really mattered at this point. I stopped talking about market cap to GDP, i.e. the Buffett indicator, years ago on this channel because it's so far off the charts. Once we hit 150%, market cap to GDP, I just quit paying attention to it because it has no meaning at this point. What are we? What did we get to? Probably 250%. And a normal range is 50 to 75%, meaning that the total market cap of the stock market should be 50 to 75% of the value of GDP in this country. Instead, we've been over 100 forever, and it's just been, crazy and out of whack. And back in 2008, I believe we got down to like maybe 75%. I don't think we even got down as low as 50% market cap to GDP in the 2008 crash because, as I said, the Fed put that on hold. The Fed stopped the 2008 market crash. They did not let it complete. And so as far as I'm concerned, that would be where I would look for a bottom in the stock market if the Fed really withdraws all support and they just let the thing go. And so that would mean, the S&P 500 would be trading with like, I don't want to say whether it would be like 15 or an 18 handle or something like that, but it would probably start with a 1. That would be my guess. That's without doing any calculations. But if I had to guess what 50% market cap to GDP looks like, we were at 2,800 on the S&P not too long ago. Actually, we were well below 2,800. I think that during March of 2020, it got down to 2,300. So it would actually be kind of conservative to say that, okay, yeah, we get down into the teens on the S&P. And just for reference, we were in the high 40s at the peak. We're in the high 30s now. If we've already fallen from 48.18 down to 39.55, falling from 39.55 down to 29.50 or something like that is not crazy. And no, I'm not looking at a chart. I'm not a chartist. I'm not talking about technical analysis or anything like that. All I'm saying is what a realistic valuation of the U.S. stock market is. Because if anything, all of this stuff that's going on, the disruptions in the global economy, the energy crisis, all of this would not point to an economic expansion of any kind. It would point to a contraction, to a recession. And if our economy is in recession, well, then GDP is falling. And so therefore, the market cap to GDP, if stock prices stay the same, would actually be going up. So stock prices have to fall just to keep up with GDP in order for market cap to GDP to stay the same. But in order for market cap to GDP to go down, the stocks have to fall even faster. And there's your vicious cycle, is that because the stock prices undergird so much consumption, which is what the American economy is all about. We don't produce things anymore. We just import things from China. As I said earlier, if stocks take a dive, which they already have, but if they continue to dive, if they fall down to a realistic valuation, something in the teens, then all of this consumption, at least most of it that we think of, all this craziness, all of this insanity, all of this mania, it goes away. Teslas go away. Six-figure pickup trucks go away. $350,000 homes in the hood go away. And honestly, this kind of a scenario is the only reason that I can come up with for why the price of oil is doing what it's been doing. Oil right now is at like $88 a barrel, I think, WTI. It keeps going down. It seems to fall every day on Iran deal optimism. Kind of reminds me of the way that the stock market used to rise every day on China trade talk optimism. It's a phantom headline. It is not anything that's going to happen. So this idea that oil prices should fall because of Iran deal optimism. One, Iran's oil coming back into the global market wouldn't make that big of a difference to drive oil prices down at a time like this. It would drive them down a little bit, but not as much as they've fallen and continue to fall every day that there's a trade deal headline. But if the reason why oil is falling is because the market is anticipating such an extreme recession in the United States and in the West in general that demand for oil actually falls faster than supply, then I could start to understand why the price of oil is going down, despite all of these, the energy crisis that we're in the middle of. The only way that oil prices could go down when supply is falling is if people just stop buying things, so there's less need for diesel fuel for trucks to deliver goods to stores, and for Amazon delivery trucks and UPS delivery trucks to deliver goods to homes. And if people stop going on vacation, so they stop burning jet fuel, they stop burning gasoline. If people lose their jobs and therefore don't have to commute anymore, they just sit in their home all day and, get addicted to opiates. Or the oil market could just be stupid, which is probably the most likely case here. I said this back in 2020, in March of 2020. I said if ever there was going to be a, what's the term? A first domino, a match that'll light the kindling. What am I trying to think of? A trigger, I guess we could say that. A trigger for the collapse that has been on the horizon because of our financial instability here in the United States. If ever there would be a trigger, you would think it would be locking down the entire country for a period of months. Yet the ridiculous stimmies, the CARES Act and whatnot, and the insane, 1,000-year flood of government money printing was able to keep nominal GDP afloat. Of course, it also set the stage for this rapid, inflation that we've got here. The inflation that we're dealing with now started with the lockdowns of 2020, and I think that they are not going to be able to pull off the same trick this time. In that the economy will not be able to shut down again, this time for energy reasons, not because of, Wu flu lockdowns. We'll not be able to do the same thing again. We're not going to be able to just collapse and then everything be fine like it was in 2020, because they've already burned their bridge. They've already blown their load. They just kicked the can down the road. And there were consequences. The consequences of kicking the can down the road in 2020 was the inflation that we are dealing with to this day. And so they can't just do the same thing again. They've already done that, and they've used that up. And so this time, truly, I don't know how you avert the collapse. It's already in motion. There are so many triggers now, whether it be the Fed raising rates, which is enough on its own. Even if none of this other stuff was going on, the Fed hiking rates would be enough to cause the collapse of the American financial system. Then you have the energy crisis in Europe, the war with Ukraine, the escalating tensions with China, and thus, the requisite collapse in confidence in American hegemony, which is going to affect our currency in the long term. The BRICS countries almost certainly are going to come up with an alternative to the dollar now, because they've seen that the U.S. is willing to just completely cut Russia or anybody else off from the American system. They're going to build their own system, and then other countries that don't want to be controlled by American sanctions are going to get onto that system too. And in time, even we Americans are probably going to have to deal with their system if we want to do trade with China. And so this is why I say that the American Washington-centric world order peaked in January of 2022. Because now we clearly are on our way out. We're not going to enjoy this, the hegemony that our overlords in Washington thought that they had. And when our entire economy is built on confidence in American hegemony, an erosion of this hegemony, a collapse of this hegemony, as spectacular as the one we're witnessing, is going to lead to an equally spectacular economic collapse. And, it's not always obvious. It's hard to see, the future without the way things are now. It's hard to imagine that there would be that much change. But think about how much things have changed since 2019. Since February of 2020. Now think how different things will be 2 years from now with everything else that we have going on now. There's so much more going on now than there was back in 2020. In 1988, do you think that the average Russian thought that the Soviet Union would be gone within 3 years? Or 4 years, I guess, for them? 1991, the Soviet Union was gone. But in the 1980s, they were the other party of the Cold War. They were the other side. They were America's equal. And then all of a sudden, poof, it was all gone. Oh, Gorbachev died, by the way. Speaking of collapse of the Soviet Union. And here's the worst part, is our leaders, unlike, let's say, Gorbachev in the late Soviet period, Joe Biden, who is just a puppet, and the people around him, they have no concept that they're in a weak position, that there are problems, in America that have to be dealt with. They're not trying to reform the system, to patch things together to keep us going. They're just trying to bring the hammer down. They're trying to strong-arm the population. America's not doing glasnost and perestroika. They're not trying to limp along. The U.S. is running headlong off the cliff. The U.S. is not trying to bolster its energy resources. The U.S. is not trying to mend its cultural divide. The U.S. regime is doing everything it can to exacerbate all those things. The U.S. is trying to stamp out fossil fuels. They're trying to force people to buy electric cars that, one, they don't like, and two, they can't even charge because we have rolling blackouts, as the state of California, again, reminded us today. They're telling people, please don't charge your electric car. We don't have enough electricity to get through the day. Please turn off lights when they're not in use. If the government response as things get worse will just be to double down and to try and make things even worse for people, folks are not going to stand for that. And the U.S., like the Soviet Union, will cease to exist. Maybe within just a few years. It could be less than 5 years, frankly. I mean, hell. Trump coming back could make things worse, or Trump may come back and lose. Because, frankly, a lot of people have been saying it the last few days, and I didn't think of it first. I'm not going to pretend like it was my idea. I've had other things on my mind. But the idea of them coming back and finally giving Trump credit for the jabs when it starts to blow up in everybody's face, when the excess deaths become unignorable, is that a word? Undeniable? I mean, they're already undeniable. But to the point to where it becomes a real issue, a political issue, they could turn around and just blame it on Trump. I don't see why they wouldn't. And he refuses to step away from it. I mean, I didn't realize he was so indignant about it. I'm not surprised. But the fact that this late in the game, he's calling up Alex Jones to tell him, hey, you need to stop spreading jab misinformation, like he's Susan Wojcicki. Trump may alienate his own base. He might divide, his own movement. And I think at this point he'd still make it through a primary. But if the jabs blow up in his face over the next couple of years, he gets through the primary. There's a bunch of people in the middle who blame him, for that, and then people on the right who, blame him for that. The guy's not going to win. And we'll have 4 more years of catatonic Joe. And that's if people believe the election, which, considering the trajectory, Democrats didn't believe the 2016 election, Republicans didn't believe the 2020 election. Do you really think that whoever loses in 2024 is going to have more faith in that election, in the 2024 election, than they did in 2020 or 2016? Probably not. They're probably going to have less faith. because the stakes are going to be higher. The pressure is going to be a lot higher because people are going to be in a much worse economic condition. Think about it, it's 2022 now. We are going to be in the depths of a new Great Depression by 2024. And so that election could be, the final nail in the coffin, just like the election of 1860. Things will be so bad. Things will be so heated. And no matter who wins, nobody's going to be happy. And we would skip the whole Commonwealth of Independent States thing. People wouldn't do that because it wouldn't be an amicable divorce. When the Soviet Union split apart, Moscow, they accepted it. That's kind of what happened. I mean, the military revolted, but then you remember the famous scene with, what's his name? The drunk. Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin. When he got on top of the tank, he said, stop. We're not going to do this. This is going to be an amicable split. We're going to relax our grip. We're going to de-escalate. And we're just going to let nature take its course. A lot of people in Russia didn't want to do that, but that's the direction that they went. And I would prefer that the United States went that kind of a direction, but I don't think we're going to. I don't think that there's going to be like a hot civil war 1860 style either. That's not going to happen. I think that there's going to be a very unfriendly divorce. I think that at a certain point, things are going to get so bad that certain states are going to go, you know what, we need to buy oil. We need to drill for oil. We can't worry about the federal government anymore. Or, let's say Trump's president, some blue states are going to say, we just can't stand all of this racism and, bad environmental stuff anymore. We got to get out. And somebody's going to do it. And they're going to do it out of necessity. That's how you really break a country apart. You make people have to do it. You don't give them... People do that when they have no other choice, when they're backed into a corner. Because you know what? It's not fun to split up a country. It's difficult. And that's why it's the last resort. People will only resort to that if that's all they can do. And there's a lot of people who already feel like that's their only option. But they felt that way in sort of a metaphysical sense. They didn't feel that they would literally starve or lose their home if the country didn't split apart. I think that more and more, there will be people feeling that way. I think that there will be people who won't want to subsidize Europe's fruitless feud with Russia. Of course, the EU will collapse before the United States anyway. But the EU's death throes, I think, may be a significant factor in raising the temperature in this country. And so even if the EU collapses before the US, things will be so bad at that point that there won't be any de-escalation. I think that there will be a lot of people who are not happy about subsidizing Europe by sending all of our energy over there. And so there will be states, let's say states like, I don't know, Texas, if Texas, has any balls left by that point. They've only got one testicle as it is anymore. But let's say Texas or let's say Doug Mastriano becomes governor of Pennsylvania and he says, you know what, why are we drilling all this oil in western Pennsylvania and sending it over to Europe when gas prices here are, I don't know, $6 a gallon, $8 a gallon? We need to keep that here and keep it maybe even in Pennsylvania itself. Maybe they want to build refineries. And the Dems in Washington will say, no, we got to help Europe. That, I think, could easily trigger something of a national divorce. So we're again in that sort of a state. With that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.